But let's get started and have everybody introduce themselves. Let's start by going around, and I'm just going to kind of call on each of you, and if you could say your name and maybe just a couple words about yourself and where you are calling from, that would be great. And Rob, I would love to start with you.
Sure. So my name is Robert Dietz. I'm the chief economist at the National Association of Home Builders. We're based in Washington, D.C., and we're a trade association representing builders of single-family, multifamily homes, and basically our mission is to provide safe and affordable housing to the United States.
Great, thank you, Rob. Phyllis?
I'm a commercial artist. Old enough to retire, probably never will. I have 3 children, and I live in my house 55 years. I'm in the Bay Area over 60. My husband brought me here, and I've been here forever. That's it.
Thank you, Phyllis. Annie?
Hi, I am originally from the Bay Area. After grad school, moved to New York and had been there for 7 years. I recently moved back. So right now I'm looking for a job. In the meantime, I'm staying at my parents' place, and they live in the Richmond district in San Francisco. So I'm single as well.
Great, thanks, Annie. Adi?
Hi, Adi Nagraj. I co-oversee real estate development in Northern California for Bridge Housing. Bridge is a large affordable housing developer working on projects in San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley, San Leandro, etc. And I also chair the Planning Commission in Oakland, which is the land use body that hears applications from developers on proposals to build buildings.
Great, thank you, Adi. And Ravina?
So I'm living with some friends of mine in the in-law unit of their house because I am in the middle of a divorce. I'm 30, and my daughter lives with me here half-time. I work in nonprofit management in general, but I hope to go back for PhD next year, which makes housing affordability even more of an issue for me.
Great, thank you. I'm going to just start off by giving you a little bit of background information, and then we'll dive in. In Living Room Conversations, and that's the organization that I work for, we're a nonprofit, but the idea is a small group of people come together to get to know one another in a more meaningful way. Guided by a simple and sociable format, participants practice being open and curious about all perspectives, with a focus on learning from one another rather than trying to debate the topic at hand. One of the ways that we find it helps us to have a productive conversation is to follow some ground rules. And I'm going to share those with you now. Be curious and open to learning. Conversation is as much about listening as it is about talking. Be open to hearing all points of view. Maintain an attitude of exploration. Show respect and suspend judgment. Human beings tend to judge one another. Do your best not to. Setting judgments aside opens you up to learning from others and makes them feel respected and appreciated. Find common ground and note differences. Look for common ground you can agree on and take an interest in the differing beliefs and opinions of others. Be authentic and welcome that from others. Share what's important to you. Speak authentically from your personal experience. Be considerate of others who are doing the same. Be purposeful and to the point. Notice if what you are conveying is or is not pertinent to the topic at hand. Own and guide the conversation. Take responsibility for the quality of your participation and that of the conversation. Be proactive in getting yourself and others back on track if needed. Okay, so I'm going to read the introductory paragraph to this conversation, and then the conversation goes through 5 rounds where we talk about, we choose a question or 2 to answer in each round. The living room conversation starts here. While Silicon Valley's economy is marked by steady job growth, declining unemployment rates, and high median wages compared to the state and nation, housing costs are causing widespread economic distress among many low and middle income residents. Silicon Valley earns the distinction of being one of the least affordable places to live in the United States. The median home value is now more than $1 million for the San Jose metropolitan statistical area. According to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, housing is considered affordable when a person pays no more than 30% of income towards housing costs, including utilities. When people pay more than 30% of income toward housing costs, they are considered housing cost burdened. And when they pay more than 50%, they are considered severely housing cost burdened. In San Mateo and Santa Clara counties, nearly half of all renters are housing cost burdened, and nearly 40% in San Francisco are in that category. Median monthly rents in those areas are $2,783 and $3,888 respectively. Let's talk about how housing costs are impacting our community. Our first round is getting started, and the first question that I'd like you each to address is what interested you or drew you to this conversation? And if it's all right with you, I'm going to follow the same order that we introduced ourselves in. And this doesn't have to be a long, complicated answer. Some of you were invited, and that's a fine response if that's what you'd like to say. But we'll go ahead and get started with Rob.
Well, so the issue of housing affordability is clearly a key one for builders and developers in terms of undertaking their businesses and creating jobs. We're kind of in an unusual space right now in the housing market, where if you think back to right prior to the Great Recession and right after, we had a large inventory of unsold homes, high vacancy rates for apartments, and just a decade later, the situation has totally changed. So from a research perspective, in terms of where my economics department at the Home Builders is interested, is to look at those ways that we can help increase housing supply, both of affordable rental units, apartments, as well as affordable single-family homes that can be purchased. And there's a lot of unusual issues in the marketplace right now, including a lack of workers available to build homes, challenging financing, and local land use policies that make it difficult to develop. So those are kind of the key things that we're looking at from a research perspective. But ultimately, what we care about is trying to find ways with policy and markets to help improve housing affordability.
Great, thanks, Rob. Phyllis, can you tell us what drew you to this conversation? And let me unmute you. Hold on, Phyllis. Okay, go ahead.
Kimberly. She walked into the room and I looked up and she said, Phyllis, would you mind coming into this conversation? And I thought, okay, but I wasn't too sure what I was volunteering for, which it's rather interesting, but I don't know whether I can give you any pertinent information.
Well, I think we're very interested to hear about your experiences, having lived in the area for as long as you have. You have a really unique point of view, and so we're really glad to have you in the conversation.
Okay, you want to hear it now? Is that it?
We will let you, we'll continue to that. This is more of kind of just an introductory round. Thanks, Phyllis. Annie.
I think when I agreed to participate in this, I had been here for about a month. So I'm kind of a newcomer, even though I'm originally from here. It's been a while. It's been 7 years, and the Bay Area has changed dramatically. Even in the past 3 or 4 years, San Francisco has changed dramatically. And I originally came back because my family's here. I want to be closer to family. And now, as I'm navigating my job search, I'm just wondering, in the long run, is this the place I want to settle down? Just hearing my peers and my friends who are looking for housing, and some are going through the process of buying a house, and they're going as far as to Sacramento because they can't find anything that's affordable here. So I'm contemplating if this even is a place I want to be, just because the housing prices are just so ridiculous. So this is definitely something that I'm thinking about and top of mind, which is why I'm part of this conversation.
Great, thanks, Annie. Adi.
Sure. I do most of my work for affordable housing in the kind of the inner Bay Area, so San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley, as I mentioned. And there are cities where I feel like there is a strong desire to build more affordable housing to address this crisis. I think what drew me to this conversation is that Silicon Valley is just, it's very different and it's very difficult. It's of course a lower density area, so you're not going to see a lot of 15-story buildings pop up. There is the public transit is not as robust as it is in San Francisco or Oakland. So I think there are a harder set of challenges to both create more equality in terms of housing and types of units that are up for rent or sale, as well as creating more kind of political will and desire to build more of this housing. So that's what drew me to this conversation.
Thanks, Adi. And Ravina.
So at this point in my life, like I'm looking for work, but I mean, I know what my standard income is. And looking around as a single person in this area, frankly, even as a married couple with two incomes, I thought that being able to afford a house out here would be really complicated. But as a single person on, less than 6 figures a year, I just don't ever really see myself being able to buy a house, and rent has gone up a lot in the 14 years that I've lived in the area and have been renting. It just keeps going up and up and up, and I don't really see incomes approaching anything that. So I have a lot of stress about whether or not I can afford to stay here long term. And this is my home. I was born here. Like, my family owned property in Fremont, and they sold it, many years ago, and now it's worth like quadruple what they sold it for. And that's kind of where I am.
Thanks, Ravina. Round 2 is our next round, and this is where we talk about core values. Please answer one or more of the following. What sense of purpose, mission, or duty guides you in your life? Or what would your best friend say about who you are and what makes you tick? Or what are your hopes and concerns for your community and or the country? And Rob, I'll start with you again.
Well, I'm a PhD economist, so economics is sort of what I've been trained to do, and it's what I love. My wife's an economist too, so I have a real kind of passion for it. And I'm a housing economist, so what I really care about, and it's interesting hearing these comments, I'm interested not just in the building of homes, but the structure of cities, and then how decisions about renting and the hope to purchase homes, particularly in high-cost areas where there's a lot of job growth, is going to ultimately affect wealth accumulation and how people feel about their communities and where they ultimately choose to live. So this is kind of what I'm interested in studying, and I'm kind of lucky to be working for an organization that essentially finances an entire economics department to do that kind of research.
She's talking to me. Yeah? Okay. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
I'm sorry, Phyllis. Wow, you must be a lip reader. I was muted, so good job.
You get to do that after a while.
That was very good. Yes, do you have the questions there with you, or would you like me to repeat them?
I have some of the questions with me, but
okay.
I need to interject something. About 3 or 4 years ago, my son lived in Sacramento, and I had some surgery done, and I asked him to come home, at which point he's now staying with me. I don't think he can afford to go back to Sacramento. Just the income alone would kill him. And he did own a condo at the time, which is gone, but I have him home for financial reasons as well, which I thought falls into this category. I'm an independent worker. I have always been independent, entrepreneurial, and my husband was the same way. So we don't have the same information when you're on a staff and or receiving a monthly income. My husband's and my income have always been, who knows what's going to be for the month. Budgeting is what we live on. So I don't relate to some of these people because I've never lived that way. Well, I take that back. Maybe when I was just out of high school, but that's it.
Thanks, Phyllis. We appreciate, and like I said, this is a great opportunity to hear from a lot of different perspectives.
Yeah, I understand.
Thank you. Annie.
So I'm in the purpose of looking for a job, and I want to make an impact on my community. So I'm being a bit more purposeful in the type of organization that I'm eventually going to be working for. But I have to say that I, as much as I would like to take my time in finding the perfect career moving forward, I'm feeling a little pressure of, oh my God, I need to find a job now because I need to start saving for a house. Living in New York, I think a lot of people rent, not many people buy. And now that I'm here, I know that this is where I'm going to stay. Well, for now, I know this is where I want to put up roots. And I am really panicked about how can I afford a house by myself since I am single. So the value for me is, again, to make more of a social impact, really help build community and be closer to my family. So now I'm living with my parents now. And I think there are a few people that I know who are also going back and living with their families. So the boomerang generation.
Thanks, Annie. Adi?
Sure. I started my work in education. I grew up in Boston and went to grad school in New York. And I worked for a nonprofit in Cambridge, Mass. that worked with low-income kids. And this was maybe 25 years ago or so. And I was on bus duty one morning, and I ended up going into the neighborhoods where my kids grew up because I was on bus duty that morning. And for the first time, I was able to understand why so many of the kids came to school malnourished, with severe behavioral problems, just by driving around the blocks and the homes that they're from. So from that point, I kind of transitioned from education into housing and into affordable housing, because I feel like the worst thing we can do is, in many ways, the trajectory that we're on, which is kind of having low-income people or people of moderate income living in certain areas, and then wealthy people living in other areas. And if we leave housing up to the quote-unquote free market, I'm concerned that cities won't be dynamic anymore, won't be able to house children or seniors, people of all different levels. It'll just go to the folks with the biggest paychecks who can afford to live in certain areas. And that notion of displacement is worrisome for me. So the work starts, I do a lot of work building buildings across the Bay Area, but it really started with that moment of driving on a bus in Cambridge through different neighborhoods.
Thank you. Ravina?
So I'd say I'm really driven by community building. I'm a scholar by nature. I went to grad school, and I loved academia. I would really like to go back for a PhD in ethics. And my friends are all artists and creators and really phenomenal, interesting people who live off of really low incomes. And as a PhD student, I will not have a lot of money hanging out in my life. And I worry a lot about where I and my friends are going to end up. My daughter is 3 right now, and she will need more space than I have right now growing up. And I don't know where we're going to end up living and what's going to be possible for us.
Thank you, Ravina. The third round we go to is our more topic-specific round. And remember, the goal for this living room conversation is for all of us to listen and learn about where we have different opinions and where we have shared interests, intentions, and goals. Answer 1 or 2 of the following questions. And I also I'd love everyone to go through and answer the questions, and then If you have questions of one another or you'd like clarification, this is a good round to do that, to kind of follow on with your questions. So here are the questions. To what extent are you and your family experiencing changes in housing costs and affordability? How is housing affordability affecting your vision for your own future or the future of your community as you know it? To what extent is housing affordability affecting your thinking or experience of the American dream? What would you like to see happen in your community or the country to address housing affordability? And Rob, we'll start with you again.
Sure. So, I mean, the question of housing affordability in the American dream, I think a good way to think of it from a research perspective is that the housing market is ultimately a ladder. And for people to rise up, all parts of the ladder have to be functioning. So that means you need to have an effective, affordable rental housing market, particularly apartments for people who are just leaving schools or for younger households. And then you need an affordable market on the for sale side. And it's not the case that everyone should always own, but it's been mentioned here a couple times when people make a decision whether to plant roots in a particular community, particularly when job growth is strong. They ultimately look down the road and say, okay, how can I afford a home? And how can I afford a structure, whether it's rental or owned, that's large enough for what would be a growing family? And if you can't make that kind of future projection financial, you're likely going to move out of that area. And I think that's a risk that we run in a lot of high-cost markets right now, is that you do see young people, particularly from the coast, leaving those markets because they simply cannot afford to rent, save up that money to purchase a home, and ultimately buy a home. And purchasing and owning a home is a great way to build wealth over a period of decades, but you got to save the money as a down payment to be able to buy. So that then raises the policy questions of how can we support both the rental market to provide supply and support the single family side to build the homes that are ultimately going to be in demand as the millennials move from their late 20s to their early 30s. And so that means that we need to protect programs like the low-income housing tax credit that provides essentially rent-controlled apartments. And we need to look at the decisions we make about land use policy in terms of building single-family homes. Because right now in the market, we lack inventory, and that's causing prices to go up. And ultimately, in these markets where those costs are going up, it will chase away those young people.
Thanks, Rob. Phyllis, I'm going to move to you. Oh, hang on, Phyllis. Okay.
To some of these things. My experience is 50 years old. We bought a house in South City for $10 down. Maybe strange to you, but that's the way the building was in this area. You could buy houses around about $20,000 for the house. And that was up and down the peninsula. I don't relate to some of these things. I haven't moved in 50 years. So I'm not up against some of that stuff. I do feel that my son coming home is a sign, like the young lady that has to go home and live with her family. It is hard, and I don't really understand how to get out of that. That's where I'm at.
Thanks, Phyllis. Annie?
I think both Phyllis and Rob hit on the dilemma I have, which is as I'm looking for a job, I think I might be open to other opportunities on the West Coast. So people are talking about Seattle, Portland, LA, so maybe even moving out of the Bay Area, not even moving to the South Bay or to Sacramento, but completely just bypassing the Bay Area just because it is ridiculous what you get for what you get for what you pay. And because I am a single person, I'm having to do this on my own. I'm very lucky in that I have my family here, but if I didn't have my family here, I have no idea how anybody coming wanting to make a fresh start can make that happen. The only thing I can think of in terms of trying to stay in the area is if my family needs help. They do have some rental properties right now, which they rent out to tenants, but it could be that in the future, if they have one of those properties available to me, that it would be affordable. But other than that, I am a little worried about what the opportunities are here for me and considering leaving. If this is, especially since I'm not, I don't work in tech, so I don't have to stay here.
Thanks, Annie. Adi?
Sure. In terms of what I think we need to do to address this issue, we as a country, I'll talk about an experience I had in developing a building at San Leandro BART station. So I worked on a development project that was 100% affordable, 115 units of family housing. And we had 26,000 people fill out kind of an interest list for that development for the 115 units, and ended up getting something like 12,000 applications for the 115 units. Wow. So it was daunting. It was sad to see that the demand is that high. And it was also amazing and inspiring. I attended the grand opening for the building, and started talking to residents who are just in the elevator or playing on the playground and hearing their stories of where they were living, a lot of them in unsafe conditions, some of them with children. To see the journey that took them to this brand new, beautiful building that's right on transit was incredible and inspiring. And I think we all need to advocate for more of these dollars to help fund projects like this, to soak up the huge demand that's out there.
Thanks, Adi. Ravina?
Like Annie, I would super consider moving out of the area because I really don't see a pathway to affordable housing for myself. I'm really, really fortunate that I have friends who had an empty in-law unit under their house and were willing to let me move in until I got things straightened out in my life and could either afford to pay them rent or find a place that I was comfortable in on my own. But I'm stuck in the Bay Area because my ex-husband works in tech and, will not leave because his work is here. And so with my significantly lower income, if I want access to my own child, which I obviously do, I have to live here. I will be facing this affordability issue for the foreseeable future. And I'm worried. I'm always worried. And I see really similar situations across my friend group. And I have no idea how to fix it, right? Because what Adi said about having 12,000 applications for 115 units, I'm not surprised.
Thanks, Ravina. I want to open it up if any of you have questions for each other or things that you'd like to clarify. This is an opportunity to do that.
I don't know if it's a question, but a broad observation. Is that something that I can?
Sure,
So I appreciate you bringing all of us together, and it's for me in my world, it's not a kind of community that I'm used to being a part of. So I appreciate that. I think there's so much we need to do, and we're in my nonprofit housing world, we're really bad at kind of we need to do a better job of marketing the problem, of highlighting what the problem is. I feel like there are a lot of people who are kind of suffering silently. And, if you're a politician and trying to figure out where to put the next, X million dollar line item in your budget, I feel like you're going to go to address the potholes and the things that people see and talk about every day. And I think I'm very open to ways that we can broaden this conversation. I do think, especially in Oakland, the homeless problem has galvanized a lot of people, and just the physical view of tents in our communities is spurring a conversation about homeless housing in a way that I haven't seen before. But I think generally we could all use advice on how to discuss this issue more broadly.
Rob, I'm wondering, since you work out of DC. I don't know if you studied different housing issues across the country. Are you seeing similar situations to what this group is finding in the Bay Area, or is the Bay Area unique?
The Bay Area is certainly among the worst housing markets in terms of having the greatest affordability challenges, both on the for sale and the for rent. Obviously, it's a function of geography. It's also a question of land availability and the regulatory costs that go into building housing. We find that nationwide, if you add up the various thousand cuts that sort of are inflicted on housing as it gets built and developed, that something like a quarter of a structure's final purchase price is made up of various regulatory burdens. So impact fees and other kinds of taxes and fees and regulatory rules that they get imposed. That's affecting housing nationwide. Now, what we do see nationwide is that the markets that have lower rental affordability challenges and much greater opportunity to get into home ownership are places that have favorable geography, which is not something you can necessarily change easily, but they also tend to be places where it's easier to build, and build both in the for-profit sector and the nonprofit sector. The good news, bad news, kind of building on what's been previously said, I think the argument's right that affordable housing maybe doesn't advertise itself. The crisis that we face nationwide doesn't get the attention that other economic challenges face, but it's at the root of many of those challenges, including lack of wealth accumulation by generations and individual mobility, the ability to move where the jobs are. The good news is that a program like the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit, which is really the only production program for building affordable rental housing, that's one of the few tax credits, corporate tax credits, that's explicitly protected in the tax reform debate that's taking place in DC. The bad news is where we are in the multifamily building cycle right now, rental affordability challenges continue to rise because incomes haven't grown particularly fast, but the actual volume of apartment construction has been falling for the last year and a half, and it's mostly concentrated at the high end. So if anything, where we are in the building cycle right now, those rental affordability challenges will continue to get worse. Interest rates are going to get higher, so the cost of owning and buying a home is going to go up. So all elements of the community that care about affordable housing certainly going to have to make their voices heard over the next few years.
So it sounds like the pressure is going to continue to rise potentially from what you described.
That's right.
So Phyllis, I'm wondering, since you've lived in that community for a long time, do you see it changing a lot? Do you see many people?
No, I see the houses being purchased only with children, people who have children. We are centrally located, half a dozen blocks to the elementary school, 4 blocks to the high school, and I think I counted 5 blocks to the middle school. It's extremely well located, but I think if I can recall, maybe 2 or 3 years to scout out this house. I really did a lot of footwork on it. And of course I bought it. At the time I bought it, it was a little upper middle class, price-wise. And I had to do some heavy talking to my husband to get that to pass, which was fine. He was concerned, and I understand that. But I'm covered by Proposition 13. I don't see a lot of prices go up for me. The houses go up, but my standard, my costs haven't really escalated. What's escalated for me is repair. Repairing costs a ton of money. I could buy a house then for what I'm paying to have it painted. That's how much it's gone up. So that becomes prohibitive. The care and feeding of the house is expensive. So I don't know if at this point I'm okay, but if I sell the house, I'll be better. financial.
So are the repair costs going up just because they're tied into the housing market, or is it again a shortage of labor and resources?
I have no idea. I have to really say that the people that have come to give me quotes on the house, the repairs, have not been Caucasian. I'm not discriminating against it. It just is what it is. And I find that very interesting. Can't get anybody to give me a price on the painting of my house. I must have had a half a dozen people say they'll be there, but they never show up. So that's very interesting. I don't know. The care and feeding of a house is expensive, period.
You want to mention about the stock market versus your house?
My son works for Wells Fargo in the stock. He's a financial advisor. My house has increased in value higher than any stock I own, which is amazing. So we realize I can't even move if I wanted to. There's no place for me to go. Unless I want to move in with one of my kids, which I really don't want to do either. But my oldest son has come home, and fortunately, he's a lobbyist. He takes care of the mundane stuff. Without him, I probably would be in some trouble. That's it.
Thanks, Phyllis. Do you find that there's a large influx of people that are still continuing to move into the Bay Area? Does anybody have a sense of that?
Yeah, so I live in the Richmond district in San Francisco, and just even in that neighborhood, it's changed. Used to be more Chinese and Russian families, so actual family units with the parents and the children. Most of them have moved out because they have grown up and moved away, and I think they've now converted, a lot of people who own the homes there have converted them into rentals. So you see in the streets of the Richmond district, there's a different type of demographic. It's changing the way that the Clement Street, which is the main area where people shop and dine, some of the stores are changing to tailor to that type of demographic, which I would say are probably, I mean, I would assume they're probably people who work in tech jobs in their 20s and 30s, young families, or single people. So I'm pretty sure they don't own, they all rent. And I'm assuming the homeowners have probably moved out into the East Bay or to the South Bay and gotten a much bigger house based off of their investment. So definitely a lot of change. And you don't see a lot of elderly people anymore on the streets. They probably have moved out of the area as well.
And if I could add in, I read a statistic that I believe in 2015 or 2016, there was a net increase of 90,000 people into the Bay Area. So some people moved out, a ton moved in, the net increase was 90K. So if you have that much influx of new people, and then you impose a lot of kind of regulatory burdens, as was mentioned earlier, making it challenging to build new housing, including our environmental law in California, which is incredibly onerous and expensive. And then it was mentioned Prop 13 earlier, which caps property tax appreciation, which, you know, there are winners and losers in that. There's, I know several people who are kind of in the Oakland Hills areas who are basically kind of squatting on their homes because they either say they don't have anywhere else to go, or because, you know, that it's a very little increase in appreciation of property taxes year to year. And so it decreases the incentive to sell to the next family moving in, right, which also kind of falsely limits our supply. So you just have these conflicts of factors coming up. So you have a lot of people moving in, and kind of a lot of what folks are left with is either to leave the region and as was mentioned, head to Seattle or Denver or, you know, whatever, Portland, whatever's the new hot city that Bay Area folks are moving to. Or what we see a lot of in the communities where we work is living 3, 4, 5 people to a 1 or 2 bedroom and just kind of doubling and tripling up, so that you can still take the train or hop in your car and get to work or school. But we're kind of living much more densely with many fewer units accommodating folks moving in.
Ravina, haven't heard from you for a few moments. Anything you want to chime in?
No, I mean, I've been listening to all of these wonderful things, and I just keep thinking, my friends are leaving, because my friends are artists and creators and educators, and they're all leaving, and a lot of them are leaving for Portland, and even now I'm some of the ones that didn't are like, oh well, I was thinking about it, but now Portland's too expensive too. So I just keep wondering, where are my people going to end up in the world? It doesn't seem like it's here.
Thanks, Ravina. I'm going to go ahead and move into our fourth round, which is reflection. And it doesn't mean that we can't continue to revisit some of the things that were brought up. But we'll go ahead and continue to the next set of questions. And feel free to answer one or more of the following. In one sentence, share what is most meaningful or valuable to you in the experience of this particular living room conversation. Or what learning, new understanding, or common ground was found on this topic? Or has this conversation changed your perception of anyone in this group, including yourself? And Rob, I'll start with you.
Sure. Well, I guess this conversation has just sort of reinforced the kinds of things that we want to do research on and think about policy on, which is how do we get some of these younger households into affordable housing markets? We talked about the buy-rent decision. Where do you live? What does that mean for your family, for your children? And I mentioned a couple times what it means for your eventual wealth. The typical homeowner in this country has a little more than 40 times the wealth of the typical renter. Now, part of that's cause and effect, but a lot of it has to do with the fact that when you become a homeowner, it essentially functions as a forced savings plan. So if you have areas of the country where you have job growth and high incomes, but people can't afford to get into home ownership, that's going to have really long-run consequences on things like who pays taxes, Social Security, who pays property taxes, and the like. So these are areas that we will continue to research on, and I think areas of the country that have high housing costs have to take a double and a triple look at ways that they can add additional housing supply.
Thanks, Rob. Phyllis?
Adding additional housing in this area is a farce. You have no transportation. You have no rail. You have no buses. You have only cars, and you can't drive on the freeway or any place else. So thinking about adding more people to the area is a farce. There'll be no room to do anything. And I don't see where building single unit homes add to the prosperity of this at this point. And I understand Ravina's problem and, Annie's problem, because my son is in the same problem. They are willing to work, they're making a reasonable living, and they can't buy anything. What's the purpose? That's it.
Thanks, Phyllis. One of the things I just want to comment on with regard to what you said is we did have another person who was going to participate who had an emergency, but I believe that person would have added a perspective, and some of you may have this as well, that he has to make such a long commute to get to work because he cannot afford to live in the community where he works. And so that's just exacerbating the traffic and the commuting and the, so I think you bring up a good point that the living and the transportation issues are very, very connected.
Well, I come from New York, where transportation, in essence, was a dream. There was a subway station every dozen blocks. You could get to work very easily. You didn't have to own a car. You didn't have to be in a car. And to me, I haven't been downtown San Francisco in maybe 2 years. It's that difficult for me, and driving is even worse. So that's my feeling with transportation. If you're not going to accommodate the area with proper transportation, what's the point in building new houses? You can't make them live in a small unit, a little area. What are they going to accomplish in that area? I mean, having Facebook and having your Google and all the other places available and working conditions, they're fabulous. But what are you going to do with those people when they leave the place? When 6 o'clock comes and they go home? They have no home to go home to. That's my feeling. We haven't produced enough to make people, to allow people to live in the Bay Area. You have done nothing, absolutely nothing to accommodate new people. That's the way I feel.
Thanks, Phyllis. Annie?
Everything that Rob and Phyllis said, I agree with. Coming from New York, where I could walk to work,
Yeah.
Or take the subway, or there's many options, right?
Yeah.
Here, it's so spread out. I wanted to focus my job search in San Francisco, and now I'm thinking that I can't be that picky because there are a lot of companies that are in East Bay and Silicon Valley. But to your point, I don't want to commute an hour and a half or 2 hours. Some of my friends are doing that. They're taking the shuttle. So then what happens is it changes your quality of life, right? Mm-hmm. You don't get to spend as much time at home. You're spending much of your time in a shuttle or in a car. It's just, if anything, this conversation is perpetuating my fear of the reality of how maybe bad it is, and it is overcrowded. I prefer to take public transit, but I do drive if I want to see my friends, most of who don't live in the city anymore. So there's just so much traffic, and that was not the case 5-7 years ago when I lived here. It is, to what Phyllis has said, it's a place that is overcrowded because people are coming in droves, and the infrastructure is not set up to accommodate that. So I agree. I think adding more homes will just make it more crowded. And it's not a city like New York where there's an infrastructure to support that.
I agree.
Thanks, Annie. Adi?
Well, I see it a little bit differently, which is people are moving here. They're coming. And so we could either not build and stop new building from happening and have, 50 people applying for a 1-bedroom instead of 10, and have that 1-bedroom go to, $3,500 or $4,000 or $4,500 for that 1-bedroom, or actually start to build more housing and kind of try to reflect supply and demand and increase the housing stock so that we're no longer having 50 people apply for a 1-bedroom and driving up the cost. Plus, and I get Rob's point, which is right, that you can tax new developments so much that it becomes infeasible. But in cities like San Francisco or Oakland, which have a fee associated with new construction, that every market rate building now has to pay a certain amount of fee that goes to a pot that then can be used for affordable housing. And so I feel like that type of system to be responsive to the demand is really important, because I think the worst thing that we can do is kind of pull up the bridges, say, okay, we're done, we're not building anymore, kind of survival of the fittest. Whoever can afford a $5,000 a month 1-bedroom, good luck. I just don't think that that's the right way to do it. And I do think that we should, as the governor has, talked about high-speed rail, deep infrastructure investment, I totally agree with that. There's cities like Boston, New York, or even the BART, built in the 60s, where that was so much money devoted to infrastructure, that we really do need to move people around the Bay much more than we are right now.
Thanks, Adi. And Avina.
So I'm in between what everyone has said. The commuting in the Bay Area is terrible. The place that I could afford to land to is an hour away from where my ex-husband lives and where my daughter goes to preschool. So while I'm looking for work, I'm also commuting 2 hours a day. And, you know, an hour of that my daughter is with me, which is a long time for a 3-year-old to be in the car just to get either to or from school every day. But at the same time, like, more housing has to be built because people are here already and they're already struggling to find places to live. And if 90,000 people a year are moving into or there's a net gain of 90,000 a year, then, like, you can't stop people from coming by denying people access to housing. They're going to come anyway. They're going to be here. They have to be able to find places to live. And I don't think that anybody wants the Bay Area to really turn into a place where only people who can afford $5,000 a month on rent can live. That sounds like a really terrible place to live, full of the exact same kind of person doing the exact same thing all the time. And I think the Bay Area would be ruined by that. We have such a great local culture and flavor, and it's because there are a lot of different types of people and families and jobs and just great places to you know, create things. And, you know, we can do better, I think, in terms of housing and in terms of transportation. You're muted.
Thank you. Rob, it looked like you wanted to say something.
If I could just add something. So, I mean, it's interesting to hear in terms of local commute times. So let me just remind you that commute times are kind of going up everywhere. I live in Washington. I only live 6.5 miles from my workplace, and it commutes, you know, it's about an hour one way. So I spend 2 hours a day commuting, and it's not much better with mass transit. So having long commute times is kind of a consequence of a growing population, and that housing is going to get built, and those people are going to live somewhere. Now, the question is whether it's going to be in places like California, which does have some of the lowest home ownership rates in the country, or places that are more affordable like Utah, where you have some of the hottest building markets in the country. So it's not just a question of coastal markets as well. You see a lot of interior growth as a consequence. But I agree with the general themes here, which is you do have to look at the interplay between transportation and housing. But as long as population's there, you're going to have to build those homes somewhere, and you might as well build them where the jobs are.
Thanks, Rob. I'm going to go ahead and move us into our 5th round, our final round, which is accomplishment and next steps. And please answer both of the following questions. What is one important thing you thought was accomplished here? And is there a next step that you would like to take based upon the conversation you just had? And Rob, I'll go with you again.
Yeah, so I mean, this was an interesting conversation. I get to visit a lot of markets as part of my job across the country, about one a week. And I actually didn't know all that much about the Bay Area housing market, so it was interesting to learn and hear directly from people who are facing it. In terms of next steps, you know, we're very engaged in the tax reform debate and some of the housing policy debates that are taking place right now. And some of my younger economists are very focused on the future of millennials in terms of home ownership and the ability to buy. So we're going to continue doing that kind of research and in hopes of getting well-informed and more tactically efficient housing policy going forward.
Thanks, Rob. Phyllis.
My oldest son is a lobbyist and works from time to time in the Capitol in California. And so I'm apprised most of the time of what's going on. I'd like to not know, but I do know, because at this point in my life, I'm comfortable. I don't have to do much of anything. I feel like what I've learned is that we have a terrible commute system, which I didn't realize was as bad until I brought it up. I was born in Brooklyn, and I commuted to high school in Manhattan. And I found the hour that I spent on the train, I did my homework, I made friends, and I managed to socialize with people going in that direction. I can't find that in my area at all. People are so busy trying to get from point A to B, they don't come home in time to be a neighbor or a friend or anything else. They're busy commuting. And I think that is the primary problem right now that needs to be resolved. It's clearer to me now than it was before. And I do have a car and I do drive. And I realize driving has become horrendous. So I thank God I have my home that I can close myself in, because driving doesn't work for me.
Thank you, Phyllis. Annie?
I appreciated hearing from everyone. It just reinforces that we're all impacted by this. This affects everybody, and to comfort in knowing that there are some individuals and groups out there that are doing research and advocacy work and looking at ways to build more affordable housing. So there are some people who are looking into solutions instead of complaining. My fear is that it won't be fast enough for me. I may actually end up moving out of the area, but definitely appreciate hearing all of this. And I guess my question is, what can I do as an individual, aside from just trying to figure out how to make it good for myself, a good situation? What are things that I can do to advocate for this? Because as bad as it is for me, it's actually not that bad. I'm in a much better situation. I have a family I can rely on. I'm not going to be homeless. I don't have a job now, but whatever career it is hopefully going to be high paying enough for me to at least sustain something. So what can I do to help, I think, is the next question for me.
Thanks, Annie. And I'll let Adi go. And if anybody has any responses to Annie's question in particular, maybe we can visit that after we go through this.
Yeah, I really appreciate this conversation and kind of the diversity of viewpoints that Mary, that you brought together. So good job. I think one of the heartening things, well, I would say two things. One is that I'm blessed to have a pretty good commute. I live in Oakland, I work in San Francisco. There's a great Transbay bus system where I hop on the bus. There's a kind of a HOV lane that the bus goes on the highway, and I get into downtown San Francisco in about 40 minutes, and I'm able to work because I'm on a bus. And it's really, it's just a small piece of cheap infrastructure that I think has helped a lot of commuters as BART begins to get really bloated. But I think there are a few, it's a really great question, the woman Annie, who asked that last question. I think the things that kind of inspire me of how people can get involved is, I think that there are going to be some major transit bond issuances up in 2018. So basically, we get to vote on should the state borrow, a ton of money to be able to build out better rail and transit system across the Bay Area. I think Seattle had a $54 billion bond issuance to build out their rail system. LA has now, they're digging a subway underground, under kind of Beverly Hills to Santa Monica, so you can take the train from downtown LA to Santa Monica. That's pretty radical stuff. And we in the Bay Area, I think because we're so fragmented, don't think regionally like other areas do. And so I think what's inspired me is that the mayors of San Francisco, Oakland, and San Jose are very close to each other and are working together on some regional things. So we get to vote pretty soon. The other thing that inspires me is, which also relates to Annie's question, is that the city of Mountain View, I think a week ago or 2 weeks ago, approved 10,000 new units of housing in Mountain View, of which either 20 or 30% will be affordable. And that was largely done because a lot of people came out to the Planning Commission and City Council hearings saying, hey, we need more housing here. I think a lot of the Bay Area traffic congestion is because we don't have enough housing in Silicon Valley. So a lot of people live in San Francisco or Oakland or Berkeley and then shuttle down or drive down. But to the extent that we can actually build more housing there, I think we'll all be better served. So that was just kind of an inspiring thing that I saw. A lot of folks coming out asking for City Council to approve more housing, huge affordability component. And so I think going to City Council and Planning Commission meetings and speaking publicly, filling out a speaker card is a small thing you can do that helps affect how these votes are cast.
Terrific, thank you, Adi. Ravina?
I think what I'm taking from this is really that it's important to talk about this. Like I plan to go to city council meetings and you know, speak up about this stuff, because like, I mean, it's a problem. I think everybody in the Bay Area realizes that this is an issue. It's not something that shocks people. Everybody talks about housing shortages and affordability. Even tech workers have a tough time finding housing that they can afford. Yeah, I think it's just time for everybody to be more vocal about it.
Thanks, Ravina. I really appreciate all of you participating in this call and just even sharing your stories and your perspectives. And I am very thankful to all of you for really listening to each other. And I also am thankful for the PJCC for putting this together and to talk about it more. I know, Rob, you're not local, but the rest of you are local, and I think you're aware that you're also invited to the event that they are hosting next month at their center, where they want to assemble many people from the area to continue this conversation so that you can talk a little bit more and understand how it is impacting people, and perhaps there's an opportunity by hearing the different impacts that there's some opportunity for collaboration and thinking about what next steps might be.